But we'll give everyone a little bit more time. I know there's one or two other folks who are going to join in and probably present. We'll see. How's everyone doing?
Very good.
How long does it take you to grow that beard back, James?
Uh, haven't I mean sometimes I trim it and that's about it. So it's been this is probably like 7 years worth or so. You can't see the end.
I love
You're
it.
jealous? Kim, you're jealous?
Hmm? Mine?
Yes, yes, Ken, you need to work harder on that.
You
Yeah.
work harder. I get where I want to go there, but there's like I used to have on my site like the measurements of the stages of there's like wizard. James is towards the wizard level. There's several levels of beard, and I get about here, and then I start, and then I cut it. So,
Hi everyone.
hello, welcome. Lots of folks. All right, I think we've got a quorum. We can get going because we've got an hour. We've got four topics that we want to dive into. But let's start with some quick introductions. Um, and I'm Kin Lane. I'm API Evangelist, and I'm just looking to try to get everyone together to talk about uh, what's going on in the space, have a conversation about governance, because I feel like a lot of automation, a lot of rules, a lot of things that don't involve humans and I wanted to invest in the human part of it and then have these conversations. So let's go down the list. I'm not gonna see if I can I'll let you guys just work through the list. So Yaara, you start.
Okay, sure. Hi, Yaara. Um, I'm working in Tariq, which is an API management company based in London, UK, because we had a mistake once and we hired someone from London, Ontario. So yeah, different time zone than yours. And I'm head of developer experience and documentation, looking into APIs a lot. I've been in tech for 7 years, so like APIs is is something I think about a lot, and I really like the concept, Kim, because I think we always underestimate the human factor. And in this role, I think all the advocates people can also agree that it's not easy. Um, so yeah, we have the governance, buzzword that everyone using, but on day to day, it's really difficult. So yeah, I'm really glad that we have this conversation.
I'm happy to have you here. Thank you. Paul, who are you? What do you do?
All right, so I'm a roving technologist for the past 20 years. I do contract work, and I have worked with vendors, particularly in the quality and test and management space. I also love to garden and help with the kids' garden club at the school, and I'm part-time operations intern this summer. And so I care a great deal about the ethics that go into our society and our system. On my technology side, I'm part of the IEEE working group for a standard around observability, which is a normative standard. And that's what I'd like to share a little bit about today.
Awesome. I'm glad you mentioned your gardening. James, who are you? What are you up to?
Let's see. I am a API architect for Guild Mortgage. Um, I just took the job not too long ago, maybe a month ago, and there's a lot to do. And of course, there's a lot to do in governing their non-existent APIs, which I am designing. So I have my work cut out for me. In my free time, I write RPG, role-playing game books and stuff like that.
Love it. Doug, there you go.
I've been writing software for a really long time, professionally for 35 years. I fell in love with APIs when I wrote my first programs using CPIC. I thought it was really cool to have two computers talking to each other, which was pretty novel at the time. Um, Recently, I was a principal engineer, principal architect for a company called Uplight, working on their data platform, building APIs to democratize data. And I love APIs. I'm very interested in the human element of governance around it. I think that myself and a lot of my peers, I think we've got a lot of the technical stuff down. And I'm a huge fan of Ken Lane, who introduced me to API first. So I'm very interested to meet all of you and just absorb as much information as I can. In my free time, I'm a member of the National Ski Patrol. I like skiing and snowboarding and growing vegetables in my garden and cooking vegetarian food.
Okay. Appreciate you being here. Thank you. Need to come out and see you again. Need to get
Yeah.
need to hang out with you more. Um, I'm gonna keep practicing your name, Yoa.
Hello, everyone. I'm the guy with the name. My name is João, and I'm managing or coordinating efforts for with several teams in a telco, in a Portuguese enterprise application integration and services and APIs since 2006. And I'm keen to learn. And also, API governance will be a big factor. We'll do a big push this year. So happy to be here. And I have boring stuff that I do of work. I manage a crazy cat, and I like to be with my family. Glad to be here.
Happy to have you. Thank you for joining. Mark McAllister.
Hey, nice to meet everyone. I am in API governance for JP Morgan Chase. I've been there for about 2 years. So our line of business is probably the largest creators of APIs in the organization. So I've been kind of digging in for the past 2 years. I think I stumbled across Ken about 9 to 10 months ago, reached out to him, just started asking some questions, found his website, and been trying to bring a lot of the principles and stuff that he's written about over the years into the organization. We are in the process of building a internalized API management solution. And I've kind of been able to help shape that a little bit, some of the tools and technologies that we're going to be introducing to kind of shift from our old way of doing governance, which was very manual laden, to more of an automated, tools-driven approach. So it's an exciting year. Just happy to be here and to learn from everyone and share my insights.
Yeah.
And I guess in my free time, I'm a professional chauffeur for my 4 kids.
Enjoy those times while
Same, same.
Dave Bisak.
Hey everyone. So I'm Dave Bisak. I'm Chief API Officer at Aperture. Aperture is a provider of digital banking solutions for smaller financial institutions, banks, and credit unions across the United States. We have a few hundred bank customers. So I've been doing APIs for 12, 13 years before coming to Aperture when it was founded 7.5 years ago. I worked at SAS and I ran the API Center of Excellence there. So I've been doing API governance for the last dozen years. In my role at Aperture, I'm responsible for many aspects of our API program, primarily API design and API governance and developer experience, making sure we have a cohesive set of APIs, et cetera. So I'm really keenly interested in collaborating with other people in this space. So I really want to learn from everybody else here. So thank you all for joining and participating. I think it's really great that people can find a common interest and then help each other out. I do have one really critical question. A lot of people have mentioned this thing called free time. I don't know what that is, so I can't really tell you what I do in my free time. So another thing I'd be interested to learn from other people is how they actually find free time.
I suffer from that as well, my friend. So maybe we can help
Okay.
each other out. So Sohaib.
Hi, folks. I'm Sohaib. I am a product manager at API Matic. which is a developer experience platform for APIs. We build SDKs, documentation, and lately API co-pilots for API providers. I've been working at API-matic for about 4 years now, immersing myself in code generation, API standards, API linting and validation, and transformation between different API formats for the past 4 years now. Really excited to be here. I unfortunately do not have any interesting hobbies like James. I wish I could say I write RPG books in my free time, but I'm mainly either working or swimming. That's all I do.
I think maybe I'm gonna have to fire up a Zoom call on this other subject and keep it, we obviously need some help.
Ideas for engineers to find free time and also what actually they can do. Yeah.
We definitely, I think we need to dedicate some time. Carol, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carol. I'm a product manager at Tariq. So happy to see Yaara here, my colleague. So Tariq API management platform. API governance has been a really interesting topic that comes up a lot when I talk to my users around governance or how they manage API, how they keep the quality of the APIs really good in the organizations. And also it is a very broad topic, a very complex topic. So we have companies that are using different API platforms in their organizations, and then they work with different styles of APIs, not only OpenAPI, but sometimes they are using like a Sync or a GraphQL. How do we provide a high level enough governance rules to rules them all? Because sometimes you don't really want to do into the platform specific details. You just want to govern that I want my APIs to be secure in this way, and it's applied to all platform, all API. So I think this is a very interesting topic and thank you, Keen, for setting up this group, because with this complex topic, I think it is crucial to get a lot of opinions from users working on API products or working with API daily to get to contribute to discuss together. Yeah. So I'm boring. So in my free time, I play with my kid. I enjoy cooking. I don't know gardening, but I will just shop from supermarket and make a meal. That's my main hobby.
Well, you don't sound boring to me there. You sound like you got plenty of going on outside APIs. So, Claire, you look familiar.
Apologies for being late, folks. I did say to Ken, could I gate crash? And I've started by gate crashing late. So sorry for that. My name's Claire Barrett. I'm based in the UK. I run a consulting business, APIs First. I help people and teams, usually very large organizations in incumbent industries, to get value from their API investments. I'm typically working in the kind of human and the strategy side of it rather than the hands-on the tools and tech. But I love hanging out with smart people like Kin who do know the answers to a lot of those sorts of questions. I do these days spend quite a bit of time on speaking about, or encouraging other people to speak and talk about APIs in the public domain. I lead a Women in APIs global community. That and my interest with clients and my life of having lived and worked in 4 continents means that I get to travel quite a bit now with my work. So I combine my free time with my work time. So I've just been in the last month, I've been in Barcelona, Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, France skiing, month before that. I'm only traveling around the UK this month, but I'll be in New York the one after that. So that's what I kind of like about the API space. Nothing to do with governance, but there you go. Thanks, Ken.
Well, I appreciate y'all being here. That was 14 minutes. So I don't know if we're going to get away with this every week, especially if we keep growing. But I think diving in, let's dive into our content, because we've got about 45 minutes left. And so after last week, which was more freeform, I just wanted to make these a little bit more structured, a little bit more topic based. We can roll and do different topics each week based upon what people want to present, what people want to talk about. But I wanted to be able to showcase it ahead of time with some sort of agenda, give it some structure, and then be able to maybe chop things up into some stories and videos and stuff afterwards to help kind of get the word out about what we're talking about here. So what I'm proposing, and this is all up for change, so feedback is welcome, is 4 10-minute episodes or segments or lightning talks where we present, give 3 to 5 minutes of on a topic, and then we open it up for conversations. And I just welcome you to just chime in. Feel free to use your hand and the other emoji kind of reactions if you want to say something, but please don't be shy. I will call on you or pick on some people if necessary, but don't be shy. So I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to keep mine as short as possible as far as the lead in, just because I want to, in the sake of time. But I'm really focused on rules right now, and not just the specific machine readable rule. I am looking at that. So I'm studying spectral, I'm studying vacuum, I'm studying Redocly, and I'm studying Appomatic, who has the most exhaustive set of rules. If you could definitely let the team know there that you guys are kind of the high water mark, and I'm having to spend a lot of time going through your rules because there's a lot of them at Appomatic. But what's the Venn diagram across them all? Because I would say there's a heavy kind of spectral lead in there, but vacuum, Redocly, and Appomatic all have their own approach based upon their platform, their tools, and how they see things. Redocly is very documentation oriented. I would say vacuum it has doctor and it's very documentation editor, but they're more focused on performance. And then Appomatic is what I consider, is the most rigorous and complete because you got to generate code in a variety of programming languages, which is not easy. And so I'm really immersed in the technical details of these, but I'm also stepping back and going, why do these rules matter? Because a good API governance rule, it's not the rule that's being applied at design time in an editor or in develop time in the IDE or enforced at build time in the pipeline. It's why do we do this? What's the guidance? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of this? What's the history of the conversation that got us to this point with this rule? And so really like OpenAPI for me, Spectral or these other rules, it's about the work that goes into them and the conversation and back to this human part. So I'm very immersed in this right now, as you can see from my storytelling on the blog this week, but I'd love to hear from you all. What do governance rules mean to you? Do you care? Do they matter? Are they used? What are your thoughts? Don't be shy.
So we use Spectral pretty heavily, and we use the OWASP Spectral rule set as well. I just consider that as table stakes. So basically, it's a minimum. It's not comprehensive, but it gives you a starting point to work with to ensure consistency across your API. And like I said last time we met, a big important part of API governance for me is answering those questions one time so that people don't have to try to find the solution to the same thing multiple times. And it might be simple things like, what is your naming convention for API elements, schema names and path elements and things like that. You put those into your spectral rules and you codify that to the point that you can, so you're sharing that knowledge in a consistent way, and you integrate it into your development pipeline, your build pipeline, so that those rule sets are available as people are working on local repositories. When they commit them up into your API repository and your CI/CD pipeline is processing those, you can apply the same rules and reject things that don't follow those rules. So as I said, I think it's table stakes. It's not everything, but it's a good starting point.
Agreed. Any other thoughts to share?
And like I briefly mentioned in the my introduction, I played with the spectral rules and vacuum rules. So what I found very valuable is their default, like recommended rule sets, which gives already a very good foundations of what a good open API looks like. It covers areas like design, the naming conventions, casing or authentications. There are more specialized rule sets for example, OWASP that helps you to find out security-related best practice that you can apply to your APIs. But what I found like missing is really a more high-level definitions of the rules, like what you mentioned, the why we want to set up these rules. This for like securities, this for standardized, the design, this for best developer experience who are using our APIs. So could we possibly have defined rules in that way, like one level up instead of going into the details like on the JSON path and what's the format to use in that field? So yeah, so I'm really interested if we can move towards or drive something more high level regarding governance rules.
Love it. I'm so with you on that.
I have so I was just looking at our Slack because I can't remember. We tried both of them, and I think with Spectral, our open API was just too big, so we got into out of memory. And with Vacuum, we also had some issue. So we want to do that, we want to use it, but what we have for now is we wanted to have basically we're creating tests using a Portman. So for every change in the API that people make, we have a GitHub action that is kicks in, generating tests for all the endpoints that we have, and running the tests so we can at least see if we're breaking our own contract. But it's not complete in terms of other things like naming conventions and other stuff that you can write rule sets, yes. So this is something that we still want to have.
Yeah, you
And I'm talking about Tariq has our own APIs in Tariq.
Yeah, and you touched on the testing overlap with it, which I think is a topic I'd love to dive into another week. But I'm going to go ahead and cut off my time playing timekeeper here, and I'm going to pass off to Sohaib, and because he wanted to talk about open API validation, which I think Venn diagram wise, like, are we linting, are we testing, are we validating? I think is an important intersection. So you want to go ahead and talk, kind of introduce from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. Could I also share my screen, Ken?
Sure way.
Okay. Um, okay. So there you go. Okay. So I want to talk about the state of OpenAPI validation today. And more importantly, what I want to answer is what do we consider a valid OpenAPI definition file? Because I've found over time that that definition is quite fluid these days. So whenever I ask someone if they have a valid OpenAPI definition, when I speak to an API team that wants to use our platform, and I ask them that because that's the first thing we need in our case, since we're generating stuff using the API definition, we like to say it's garbage in, garbage out. So you need to have a very well-defined OpenAPI definition, hence the very rigorous rule set that Ken was mentioning earlier on. So every team says that they do have a valid OpenAPI definition. The response is always an emphatic yes. But in reality, a valid OpenAPI definition I found is one of those rare and elusive endangered species like snow leopards, which I very rarely see. I wanted to share my screen, but Zoom is gonna ask me to like quit and rejoin, so I think let's skip that. So going back to the valid OpenAPI definitions. So API-matic has been in existence for about 8 years, and during that time, we've had about a million API definitions imported onto our platform. So we ran some tests on the definitions that have been uploaded, and the results were something like this. So about 20% of the API definitions that we saw, they were downright invalid, like they had major syntax issues. We just couldn't even parse them. Out of the remaining specs, about 50% had issues that we consider critical for SDK generation or documentation generation. And those numbers make me really sad because all of those people are going to have trouble when they try to use a code generation tool or a documentation generation tool. So, that begs the question, when all of these teams already have governance pipelines in place and tools like Spectral in place, why do they end up with API definitions that could be considered invalid? And where is this discrepancy coming from, where teams are thinking their API definitions are valid, but they're actually not?
Quick question. Can you define your definition of a valid OpenAPI document?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that is also what I was going to ask at the end of my whole pitch.
Okay, great.
What does everyone consider a valid API definition? To me, a valid API definition is one that conforms to the OpenAPI standard, that follows all of the required or must have rules from the OpenAPI standard. So that is our definition.
The schema.
And then that
There's a
is the
schema
definition.
for it.
Sorry?
The schema that applies the schema.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a
Yeah,
JSON schema, and that's a
The JSON schema
exactly.
for the OpenAPI 3.0 or 3.1 specification.
Exactly that. And that is what we've built our platform around, right? That is the contract between our platform and our users. As long as they conform to the OpenAPI standard, we'll be able to give them SDKs or docs or other tooling, right? But I had these examples to show you of things that I've tried doing. And actually, I went around at API Days London last year, and I had this API definition which had very obvious errors. It was not like I had put special characters and schema names, like all of these random hashes and ats and tildes. And I was going around, and anybody who would allow me, I would import that API definition into their governance pipeline and just see if they complained about the issues. Not one pipeline complained about my faulty OpenAPI definition. Specifically that scenario where I had introduced special characters and schema names. In fact, I even when I imported that spec into Spectral, just using the default rule set, I was expecting Spectral to scream at me, but nothing, crickets. It said, this is perfect. I tried some documentation tools to generate documentation, and they gave me documentation for those weirdly named schemas as well. So, that is what has led me to this question, and this is something I'm very interested in finding out from everybody who's here today. So as we're talking about governance and testing and security and all of these things, one of the essential bits is the conformance to the OpenAPI standard. So how strictly do you think an API definition should conform to the OpenAPI standard? And in general, what do you consider a valid OpenAPI definition file?
For me, it comes down to JSON schema literacy. I don't think most folks understand that that OpenAPI uses JSON schema and the dialects between 2.0, 3.0, and 3.1. And I don't think people use JSON schema to validate their own requests and responses. So it doesn't come naturally to them to do it in themselves, even though in VS Code you have tools to do it, and you have editors to do it. So I don't think people are accustomed to JSON schema as a validation tool. They know it's there and everybody uses it, but I don't think people are familiar with it.
Not to get too philosophical, but I think also it has to do with like the veil of ignorance in a way, in the sense that like if you don't realize that you're going to be on the crap end of that stick or the short end of that stick, the validation doesn't really matter. So you can go and publish, or by acquisition, like a little acquisition from a larger company brings in IP that doesn't conform, and it's kind of hard to put a standards bar up here, creating all new work for people where it already works. What's the problem? So being to Ken, to your point, right? Validating requests and responses using JSON, that's like a good first step to saying it's not just because we say so, it's because it helps downstream tooling, upstream tooling that you could be using. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I had in mind, that yeah, it should be for the JSON. Obviously, I agree with you, Kim, but also I was thinking, okay, if it breaks everything, then we need to improve the schema. Let's say the schema does not include these things. We need to improve the schema because we cannot have it breaking tools that are like, standard, like Redocly or Swagger renders, and also SDK generators, Terraforms that are using it, like all this stuff. So that's what I had in mind when you were asking what it means validation, if it's
Yeah.
breaking it or not.
Yeah. So for me, we have a lot of different definitions of what valid means. So at the lowest level, it's the OpenAPI document is specified either in YAML or JSON format. We author ours in YAML format because it's easier for humans to manipulate. So at that lowest level, it has to be valid YAML. So our pipeline and our tools, we first run YAML lints on everything. And we have a linting rule for YAML that specifies, okay, how do we want the YAML to be presented? And so we actually can invalidate an API if the YAML is not according to our linting rules. And basically it allows us to consistently edit those across different editors and things like that. So we have like max line length rules and other types of YAML type stuff. But basically it's going to find out too if the YAML is invalid. So if you forgot a close quote at one point in your source, it's going to catch those types of things. So that's the lowest level. And then we feed it through Spectral, which is going to do, we use the OAS3 rules. So it's going to validate against the OAS3 schema for the OpenAPI, and that's going to catch all the other primary elements of is it valid or not. And then we have our own linting tool that we wrote and started with before Spectral even existed. And we continue to use that because there's some rules that are easier for us to write in that tool. And they tend to look at high level structure type stuff. And so we apply a lot of rules in that. And so that's our higher level definition, basically conformance to our style guide. So it's not valid if it doesn't match our style guide. And our style guide does things, and it's going to catch, this example here. So we say schema names always must use simple alphanumeric identifiers. Start with the lowercase letter, and then you have mix of lowercase and uppercase. But we also do spell check on identifiers. So all the elements of an identifier, if it's we use camel case, we break it down into those words, and all those words have to be in a dictionary. And we have a dictionary extension that says, okay, our APIs allow these additional words, like we do banking. So ACH is a valid word in our APIs. So we have those types of things. So we validate all the identifiers for schema names, path elements, parameter names, etc., using those same conventions. And so that defines a higher level set of validation rules as well. And we have everything's in Git repositories. We do source first, API first design. So all of our API source is in Git, and we have Git pre-push hooks on the Git repository, which run all this validation on everything. So you can't even commit into a Git repo. You can't create a pull request unless you pass all this validation. So again, this is automating as much as you can so that you can prevent people from making mistakes and then enabling, as was mentioned here, all the downstream tools. If you want to be able to generate a mock server for your API using Prism or some other tool, or you want to generate your API doc to preview that, or you want to push it into an API gateway, et cetera, all of those tools require some level of validation. So we don't even allow an API to get into the source repo unless we've done that preliminary validation. So we run Spectral. We also run the Swagger CLI has an additional validator because we found like with the Tike API gateway, we have things that passed Swagger, but Tike API gateway would reject it because it runs the Swagger CLI validate first, and that does additional validation that's in addition to or on top of OAS validation. So we added that to our pipeline as well. So we run the Swagger CLI validate as well. And we also have to run a down convert because some tools like Type don't support 3.1. So we down convert from 3.1 to 3.0, create a new version of the API definition. And we use that for those tools that don't support 3.1. So all those things are part of what's valid. So we have things that are valid for 3.1, but they're not valid for 3.0. So we have to down convert in order to make our API definitions valid for those tools.
I like your stack, and I think we're going to need more visuals to kind of define what is valid here. But I'm going to shift gears and hand it over to Paul, and let's shift gears to observability. What are you thinking, Paul?
Well, first, let me take myself off mute.
It's a good start.
And then secondly, share my desktop. And let me just check if you can see the slideshow in full screen.
I can see.
Okay. Let's fast forward because it's very limited time. So my intent here is to at least put some topics out on the table and then ultimately ask the question, where does this group having the experiences and expertise around API governance, where do you all think that there are useful hooks, useful moments in the governance mindset, like, process and policies and intake and all that stuff? Where can we inject better thinking about observability? So really quickly, we are talking about three topics here, obviously. And so as an n-body problems go, there's more stuff that that I produced, and I'll share this deck out as well. But let's just level set for a second together. So what is observability? In short, it is, I like the definition the most from Charity, from Honeycomb, is the ability to ask questions of your systems. And oftentimes questions that you didn't know you were going to ask because maybe you didn't need to, but you can't always just change things in production. So what information needs to be emitted? And now the classic definition of observability, for more than just software or cloud-based stuff, is kind of the Wikipedia thing basically says the ability to collect data about program execution. But that almost kind of infers that it's from an outside perspective. And modern observability says that every component, every system, in a way, is responsible for emitting the information rather than it just being pulled or yanked from the insides of the system. And so there are some things that you can't yank, whatever the kids say these days. You can't just reach into a complex API and infer what not just the system and the component like the JVM or the runtime metrics aren't good enough. Oftentimes, it's a critical piece inside the logic of the API or the application that is meaningful information to business outcomes, right? Or things that you just can't infer from the runtime, like queue lengths and stuff. So a better definition, I think, comes from the systems thinking perspective, right? In that what we're trying to do is understand how the components, the infrastructure, and the data all contribute to achieving a business outcome or objective, right? And logs, traces, and metrics, you'll hear that a lot in the observability space, like their pillars. They're really just examples of different types of telemetry that could be emitted from a system, but to what end, right? And so if you take a systems thinking approach and you take all these components and you look at these different aspects of each of the components, you end up with producing evidences or telemetry that work that help to answer questions. Is this working as it was designed to, right? Not just on works on my machine dev or pre-production environments, but yes, in production environments. And is it accomplishing its business goals, right? Make sense so far? Anybody? Okay. So the mission of observability, right, not just the definition, is, in my view, this is all my view, clearly, is appropriate access and the telemetry for a number of key elements, which is like evaluating correctness while things are being operated, not just like statically or not just at compile time or, in a continuous process, checking and linting stuff, but like actually when it's working. How do you know it's working, and how are you consistent about how you make those measurements across environments? This better telemetry also helps to make more expedient the diagnosis and resolution of operational incidents. When you don't have enough information and you're on call and something's not working and it keeps restarting a container, how do you know? Do you have access to those containers? Is that appropriate to have dev access to production environments? Not always, right? So this telemetry is terribly important for not only like historical view of trends and maybe setting some SLAs and SLOs and SLIs better. It's for the moment of the oh crap moments, right? And across a distributed system, being able to make sure that you have a complete view of where these things are going and where they were coming from. So when I say appropriate, I mean it's sufficient for whatever use, whether it's debugging, diagnostics. And when it comes to access, we can't expect that people have access to production environments like into the thing that's producing the logs. We only have the things that are emitted. So this is where I really get a little bit thin because I'm not an API governance expert. I've worked with GRC, I've worked in risk management and quality management before, but like to me, the outcomes that governance are trying to achieve are setting up norms, patterns, and practices, rules, like Ken was saying, aligning policy to the risks that an organization has stated they're willing to take or not willing to take. And I think one of the key things about governance is that ultimately that work has to be reported up somewhere, whether it's for compliance reasons to an industry standard or whether it's internal to leadership. And so, really, when it comes to observability and APIs, there's a clear need for it, right? To be able to achieve those business mission and the goals and missions, but also to expose like health metrics, right? How deep do you go, and how much of the telemetry around the health of individual components, multiple components, every API, right? I don't know about you, but I don't just run my APIs in just one container. It's multiple replicas of the same stuff. And even if it's stateless, it's still it's a multi component system at that point. So really, and you can, when I give you the link to the deck, you can look at some of the things that I sort of whiteboarded with ChatGPT. Am I being complete about my thinking? And there's detail under there too that's actually pretty good at summarizing like, API health metrics, security, and stuff. So just a note, the industry has in some way gone past the vendor specific and proprietary ways to expose or to emit this telemetry. Open Telemetry is a CNCF project that has been out there for a while now. All the clouds have some way, shape, or form adopted it, and a lot of organizations has as well. And what this does is provide a sort of a middleware layer so that when you're writing code that emits this information, and there's also runtime injection stuff too if you want to. But like when you need to emit a critical piece of information, you have a way to do that that's decoupled from specific and proprietary ways to do this. So like the industry has grown up in the past 5 years about how to do this. And so the last part here is some what I thought were meaningful potential questions that an API governance approach could ask to expose what is and is not in play given, a team that's built an API or manages an API, what they do and don't have related to observability. So I said a lot there.
So I think one thing I'd like to kind of put in front of you is the concept of deprecation and sunsetting of endpoints and schemas, and that's not really in here. And that's like a prime thing about API governance.
Yes. Yes. I kind of tripped over that
Save
last minute as well.
workloads.
Yeah.
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 So I'll layer on. So I know the stack for every one of my APIs. So I use AWS API Gateway. I use New Relic for monitoring. So any tool that I use for that stack, I pull that data, the inputs and outputs, primarily outputs for that, and I store that alongside the OpenAPI. And I have rules for that. So I have AWS Gateway rules. I have New Relic rules, and it's a topic that when I widen it and share it with people, most people are scratching their heads and go, "What are you talking about?" Applying linting rules to beyond OpenAPI is just foreign to most people. And so I take any output from any of my API systems and I build a set of rules that govern and lint that. And I don't call it observability, but it fits within this, I would say.
Oh,
Well said.
I don't know if this is, I don't really have anything. I guess this is just kind of food for thought. When I think about observability and APIs, I try to think of it from a product and an engineering perspective. Like product says, here's a problem, I need a solution. How do they verify whether or not it's been delivered? I think observability is part of that. And then from an engineering perspective, I always like to think of, okay, it's 2 a.m., I just got paged.
Yeah.
What information do I want to have when I get to my desk so that I can recover as quickly as possible? And distributed tracing, in my opinion, is paramount. Like you can't, I think it's impossible to manage a suite of services and APIs without distributed tracing. I certainly don't like hopping on a bunch of servers and grepping logs. I would rather be able to say, somebody called me and this is where in the call chain it failed. Now I can start to recover quickly.
Exactly. Especially when you don't necessarily own the downstream or upstream services.
Right.
And it's funny to me that a lot of third-party providers of data through APIs don't at least provide some hook now that we've got standards that are widely adopted to be able to help with their span and you be helped by their span. You know what I mean? So that's why I say like there's got to be a huge overlap between observability topics and API governance.
Yes,
Anyone?
I have a question. So we need to expand the concept of observability throughout the whole API lifecycle management, right? Because how do we know if a given business goal was achieved for an API?
Mhm.
Of course, you have to tackle that immediately when you get paged at 3 a.m. But in order to know why, you need to go back in time and see how that API was born and if it matches a given business goal or not.
Yeah, that's the first question that I had here, the tickler question, that you might be in a conversation with a new team lead, like what's the business goal of this API? How would we measure whether it's being achieved in operation or not? Because it what
Yeah.
works? Because you're not getting paged? I don't know. Where's the evidence on a continuous basis that this thing is working as expected? And then the other thing was the SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs coming from the SRE and DevOps stuff that I've been living for the past 10 years is like, how do you actually know they're implemented? You might have a design doc that says this is what it is. Where's the proof? Where's the evidence? Where's the IAC? Where's the as code proof? And also, where's the measurements, the telemetry that's coming out as proof that you even properly applied that and implemented that across environments?
All right. Great topic. I think we're going to need your deck, Paul, and continue the
Definitely.
conversation offline. But I wanted to shift gears and give it to Yaara to talk docs.
Hi, yes. 1 second, let me share my screen. I was actually taking a few notes from the last conversation because really good ideas. I love it. Let's see, it's that. Where's my, okay.
Sharing is never as easy as it should be.
Yeah, because when Zoom allows you to share a few windows, it's really hard to see which one, you know. Anyway, I can't see you now for some reason.
You see it? I see it.
I can't see you, though I don't have the, yeah, it doesn't show me for some reason. So, look, I started a thread a couple of days ago on LinkedIn, and then I reached out to Keen. I said, hey, there's something on my mind about it. And basically, it's about where should we store our APIs, our OpenAPI specs specifically. So I created using AI. It's not complete or full, but I just told AI what I need, and it created me this cute mermaid. And I'm just sharing it, but it's basically, to be honest, I wasn't sure if this is easier or this one is easier, which has nice colors. But basically, I was trying to show a flow, a progress of what happens to present my problem, because I felt like in LinkedIn when I asked, where do you think you should keep your OpenAPI specs, assuming you have a few. I had lots of thoughts and that I didn't share on purpose because I wanted to hear opinions, but here maybe I can just show what I have in mind and what is the situation. So basically, we have OpenAPI, and what I had in mind is we have this situation that the API is in the product. Every product has their own OpenAPI specification. That means that the engineers just add a new endpoint. Now we have guidelines and we have checklists, and we have also a checklist of how to review an API. And we have style guides for endpoint naming and everything. Now, this is all in text. It's horrible, right? We need rule sets. I totally agree. Linter is not enough, our linter. We have as well Swagger and Redocly. And anyway, engineers, they introduce new APIs. We need to work fast. We don't have the luxury to have a team that is thinking about APIs for ages. The thing is that there are lots of mistakes and issues, and we easily break the contract just because when we update it, we write it sometimes manually, sometimes not. It depends. So we struggle with that. Now, in addition to that, our OpenAPI, we generated all the specs from code, and they're very accurate. They're extremely accurate. So we have schemas and examples for everything we could. So it's now when we created it, it's very accurate, but we finished the work, and now engineers add manually stuff when they need, depending on the needs of the product. So now what do? I feel like there's no way to govern that. And then we merge that, and then it gets to the client, and then oops, there's some problem. Or we release it, or we publish it to Postman, and it's really hard to take care of it, and it's all over in different repositories. So we can't really review everything. We don't have the manpower to review everything. We don't want to be involved in this level, my team, I mean. So I'm trying to think if there is a better way. And what I thought, and I wanted to share here, is maybe we can have a centralized OpenAPI repository. So you create a PR, and sorry that it looks like it's a structure, but it's a flow. I just feel like it's, as I said, easier to see it than this one. And then you have this approval process, and you have CI checks. And when it's the all green, as you know, we can merge it. And then we release it. So we have an official release in GitHub. And then we can decide what to do. So the engineer that created the PR now has an official OpenAPI, and then they can use it. If they use it or not, it depends. Sometimes they create the backend that they don't really dog food the OpenAPI, so it's also okay, because our CI will check it against the actual implementation. And this way we have like proper release, and with the API specs we can just post it to Postman, and we can create SDKs, and when we copy them over and we release the SDKs officially, and then people can start using it, and then we can have Terraforms and other stuff, and other repositories can use the SDKs when they need to. So this is the idea I was thinking about. Obviously, I don't think it's innovative or anything. I'm just sharing, what we discuss internally, because we haven't done that yet. And taking it away from repository, it's not always easy, because we're the developer experience team and there is the engineering team, and it's different scope. But one thing that someone wrote on LinkedIn on the thread was really makes sense. He said that PRs for the code and for APIs have different needs. And it really resonates with me in terms of how to present it to the business as well, and to the engineers. It's just different needs. We can't have the same process for both, because when engineers want to merge the OpenAPI, they normally do this with the code. They're under the pressure. They have the squad and they have the sprints, and they just need it to do that. And it doesn't work well with the review of the API, because sometimes, oh, we need to change this, we need to improve that. And that's why I think splitting it is a better solution. Yeah, that's it.
Makes sense.
Happy for opinions.
I'm seeing a lot of this groups getting to this place where they need more structure in their pipelines. And what tools do we have there? What's the relation? Do we mono or micro, distributed repos? Are we in one org? What's the flow? Is this just about the spec, or are we actually building and deploying the API? There's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of legacy baggage that comes here from CI/CD and the software development lifecycle that may or may not be needed in the API lifecycle. So yeah, it's important work.
I don't have an answer to this, but one of the things that concerns me would be the drift between the code and then the spec. And for some reason, I don't know why, my gut would tell me to try to keep the spec as close to the source as possible, just so that you don't end up with that drift. But I don't know what the right thing to do would be.
So to be honest, today we have so many solutions, and we have Git actions that are being triggered. So actually, this coupling them together is not always smart. Just not smart. It's just not always helpful, because you want this way of to govern your APIs. You want to be able to control, and it's different teams. So they have their own sprint, and when we need to review APIs and improve them, it's a different one. And also, the way I think about it, when we release the contract, it's a contract. It's a binding contract. So we wrote tests that make sure we comply with that contract. How do we write these tests? We will check it against that code. So obviously, it's not trivial always to do this release, because you need to kind of test it, you haven't released it yet, so you need to test it against different branches. But still, you test it against a live code that is running, right? And that, for me, is enough coupling, that the actual CI is doing that. So we only merge if it works.
I think where maybe just listening to you talk, I think maybe where I feel comfortable with coupling the API spec with the code is similar to how you would couple like a database schema or a data repository schema with your code. So I think I'm just used to doing that. So that's why I would think, well, I would just probably just keep it with the code and continue to use the same kind of PR process. But again,
no, don't.
it's a
I'm
really good
actually
question.
looking for that, to hear that, because all the engineers, I don't know, they're not so happy to do that. So that's why I really want to hear that.
Mhm.
I'm trying to stimulate folks to build more visuals and tooling to facilitate conversations around the pipeline in the workflow, because I'm seeing groups talk past each other as I work with them. You have software developers, you have architects, you have security, you have compliance, you have different people, and none of us are on the same page with any of this.
And the observability of that if we have a standard on the pipeline, can we observe that it is like conforming to what we want? That could be interesting too.
Yeah, I lint my GitHub Actions. I have a rule set for my GitHub Actions just because I don't trust myself in what I'm putting in there. I just don't. I think it's important. We're at time, so it's clear we're going to need other ways to continue these conversations. I have API Evangelist. I don't worry about myself. I'll be blah blah blahing until the about all of this. I encourage you all to write on your blogs and your domains. I encourage you to continue on social media. Paula and I have been talking about other back channels, other ways we can continue this conversation. I would love to hear your ideas, what works for y'all. Because I'll publish this video. I'm going to work through the stories here, but obviously we got more discussions to do. And then let me know what y'all want to see next week. Feel free to pitch ideas that you want to present or you would love to hear others present. And let me know.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for setting up,
everybody.
Ken.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you all.
Appreciate
Bye.
it. Cheers.
Thanks, Ken. Bye.